Okay, here we are. Hello, everybody. It is the second week of August. We are here for our Holy Ground meeting, Holy Ground gang meeting. And I was prefacing to the ladies that before we get started, sorry, not sorry, this is going to be a 2-week lesson because this week, as you guys know, we are coming from the book, She Speaks Wisdom from the Woman of the Bible to the Modern Day Black Woman, where every week we have been going through a woman of the Bible, learning more about her, how we are similar, different, and things that we can glean as far as wisdom from these women. So this week it is I Am Jezebel. That is the woman that we were speaking on this week. But what I was telling the ladies that before I even got into really studying about Jezebel, I was studying the back part of it, like what happened before and some of the things that were wrapped around the story of Jezebel. And I have 4 pages of notes. And I think only like 2 of them, 2 bullet points in my pages are about Jezebel because the story was just so good. It was so many nuggets that were dropped in there that I was like writing my notes and I was like 4 pages in and I'm like, dang, I still really haven't even touched on Jezebel. And if you guys know, people talk about the Jezebel spirit and you hear people call other people Jezebel and all of that. I want to get into that. But I think that there's so much that we have to get to before that. And as I was studying, there was so much that God was imparting into me that I think is important that this is just going to be 2 weeks. So it is what it is. Sorry, not sorry. But what I will tell you is that I'll give you the scriptures on where you can find Jezebel. And then I'm also going to give you the scriptures that I was reading from when I was doing my studying. So Jezebel can be found in the Bible. I'll give you a little background about her, but we'll talk about her again next week also. She can be found in 1 Kings chapter 16, verses 30 through 32. 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 4, 13, and 19. 1 Kings 19, verses 1 through 2. 1 Kings 21, verses 4 through 16, 23 through 25. 2 Kings chapter 9, verses 4 through 10, 22, 30 through 37, and Revelations 2, verses 20 through 23. And Jezebel, basically, she was she was a princess and the daughter of Ethbaal. And he was a king. She was raised to worship gods known as Baal. If you've studied Old Testament, you hear a lot of times people are talking about worshiping idols and Baal. And we see how many people, the people of Israel who came out of captivity of Egypt, began to worship other idols. Baal was one of the idols in which they began to worship. And so she married King Ahab and turned him from God, and King Ahab began to worship Baal as well. So she's most known for being one of the most evil queens of all time. Her marriage to Ahab, she's also known because of her threat to Elijah, because he killed the prophets of Baal. We'll get into some of that when we talk about the backstory. And her death was prophesied by Elijah. So not Elisha, but Elijah, who came after. We'll talk more about that next week. So when I was doing my studying, even though we first hear about her in 1 Kings chapter, I think 16, I went back to 1 Kings chapter 12. And so I started reading 1 Kings chapter 12. And the reason was because when it talked about Ahab, it was saying that Ahab as a king was worse than Jeroboam, Jerobam. And I think I might have spelled that wrong here. Yeah, Bam. He was a worse king than him. And so I was like, well, dang, if he was a worse king than him, then how bad was he? Like, what was really going on? So that's what took me back, and why I had 4 pages of notes was because I started so far back in the scripture or in the chapter. So again, I started at 1 Kings chapter 12. And I really encourage you guys this year, I've been stressing Bible study, like not reading the verse of the day, not reading a couple of verses, but really getting into Bible study and really getting into studying the word, because the word says to show thyself approved. So even though we're having this time together, even though we've been going through these women of the Bible scriptures and stuff together, it's still important for you to be able to go and glean from it, because what I'm telling you and what I'm giving you may not be the same revelation that you have. And I want you to be able to have your own revelation of what's going on from these stories. Every week, we're learning something new. We're learning something different. And even though there are things that I have known before, I still learn something new every time I read it. So I really want for you guys to go in and start doing Bible study with yourself. So outside of this time together, having it. So like next week, we're going to be talking about Jezebel. Go in and do your own Bible study so that even when us amongst the ladies who are on this call, when we have our time later on, you will be able to go in and be like, okay, this is what I want to add to the story, because I learned from y'all too. But anyways, back to Kings chapter 12. So Jeroboam, what ended up happening with him is he had 2 golden calves so that the people would not turn back to God and rebel against him. He was wise enough in his own mind to know that if people went back to, because he really wasn't supposed to be the king, he knew that if people went back to worshiping God and really trusting and believing in God, that they were going to rebel against him. So what he said was, and he knew that if they went away, so they had to go away to be able to go to worship God. So what he said and told the people is that basically, I'll bring God to you. I'll make these 2 calves, these golden calves, and these are going to be the things that you can come to worship God. So that way you don't have to travel far. He was kind of making it seem like he was doing them a favor so that they wouldn't have to go far off to worship God. So that he put these calves up, the people start doing this. Point I want to make right here is that people may make things seem like they're convenient for you, and it may be to your detriment. So that's why it's important for us to know and hear the voice of God for ourselves. And we'll learn about this again later on in another story that we're going to talk about, because it's like 5 different stories. I told you I got 4 pages of notes. And it was good, and it got gooder. That's not a word, but it's going to be my word. It got gooder. So you have to be able to understand that convenient is not always the way to go. So because he was trying to make it convenient for them, they decided, okay, great. Thank you so much, King. You're making this convenient for us to be able to come and worship these calves in place of God, but we still are going to give our sacrifices and do all the same things. Well, the first thing God told Moses to tell the people was, you should have no other gods besides me. We ain't going to even get to the other 9 commandments. They broke the first one. So that's the first thing. And he also is the person who started to create holidays for the people to believe that they were honoring God. So I was thinking like, wow, how many of these holidays do we celebrate that we are acting as if we're worshiping God, but they have been turned away from God? Think about Easter, which is really about when people talk about a bunny and chocolate candy and eggs. That has nothing to do with Jesus. It has nothing to do with God. It's really supposed to be about the resurrection. We think about Christmas. People are more concerned about the tree and the gifts and all these other things, and not really worried about the birth of Jesus. So these 2 made up holidays is something that happens back then, but we still follow these practices today. So he created these holidays to make the people believe that it was a time for them to be worshiping God. Then there was a man of God. This man has no name, but he came against Jeroboam, and he told him that what ended up happening was when he came against him and he spoke against what he was doing, he said, I want to have this man arrested. And he put his hand out. And as he put his hand out, his hand froze into place. And he could not move his hand. And it was because he was going against the man of God, because he was speaking against what God was saying directly. God struck his hand. So he was not able to move his hand. Now, mind you, even though he was turning the people away from God, he still was knowledgeable to know that God was almighty. He was getting the people not to think that. He was getting the people to believe in him, but he still had the reverence and knowledge that God is really the one in charge. So when he knew that his hand was frozen, it was because of God. He asked the man of God, who does not have a name in this story, but he said, can you pray for me? Can you intercede on my behalf? Even though he was going against him. Well, the Bible tells us all the time that he will make our enemies our footstools, and to pray for our enemies, to pray for those who spitefully use us. And this is one of the many examples where we see that actually happening in real time in the story. So when his hand gets frozen and he tells the man of God, can you pray for me? The man doesn't say like, no, because you was just trying to get me arrested for telling the truth. He says, okay, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to intercede to God on your behalf. even though you were wrong. So here's another point that I want y'all to jot down is how many times has somebody wronged you and you still had to pray for that person? Or how many times has somebody wronged you and you should have prayed for that person and you didn't? Pray for your enemies. I do it, and it was very hard in the beginning, but now if somebody wronged me, it's so quick for me to pray for them because I understand that it's more of a blessing to me to pray for them than to try to curse them or to try to have something or to try to think negatively or speak negatively against them. When you start praying for your enemies, you will see God do a different work in your life. I promise you that. So he tells him, okay, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to intercede on your behalf. As he intercedes for him, his hand becomes made whole again. He's back to normal health. He's actually healed. So we can also learn from this is that by interceding for somebody, you can actually help heal them. He could have easily gone to God and prayed himself, but he knew that the power was going to come from the person who had the better relationship with God or actually feared the Lord because he had no fear for God. So when the man of God interceded for him, he went ahead and his hand was healed. He told the man of God after this, he says, come to my house and eat with me. Basically, like, you healed me, my bad. I'm going to invite you over for dinner. And the man of God told him that by the request of God, that he could not go. He said, even if you gave me half of your kingdom, half of your house, half of all that you own, I cannot come back and eat with you because before I entered into this place, God told me not to eat, drink, any of that. And he told me to go out a different way. Don't even come back the way in which I came. So what I wanted us to understand from this part of it is that he was ordered by God and he obeyed God. I'm going to talk a little bit about obedience again because I want you to really hone in on his obedience. He said, you can give me half of what you got and I still don't want it. And it doesn't matter if you're offering it to me. God told me don't take nothing from this place. Don't eat, don't drink a cup of water, nothing. Say what I got to say what I told you to say, and get up out of there. And matter of fact, don't even come back down the way you came. Go a different way. So sometimes we have to do things differently without question from God, because he didn't say, well, God, I'm going to do your work. I'm going to be a little bit hungry. Shouldn't I be able to stop and get something to eat or drink some water or something? And not just from him, but from anybody. And why do I got to go back a different way? I know the way that I came. He wasn't going back and forth with God. Obedience. He was having swift obedience to do what God told him to do. So when he did this, he ended up going out the opposite way, going a different way than the way that he came, without question of God. And there was an old prophet. This is one of the few times in the Bible where you see them say, and it might be the only time, I'm not 100% sure, but I was looking and I was like, I never saw somebody say an old prophet. You just hear prophet a lot. But there was an older prophet who was a true prophet of God. And his sons had came and told him what happened. And he said, go find that man of God and tell him to come back with me. Tell him to come back with you so that he can eat and drink here. So they went and they told him, our father said he's a prophet just like you. Our father has told us to tell you to come back and to eat and drink within our house. The man of God said, I can't. God, he said exactly what he told Jeroboam, whatever Jay's name, Jeroboam. He told him the exact same thing. Why? Because he clearly heard the voice and direction of God and what God said. He said, no, I cannot, because God told me not to eat or drink in this place. And he told me to go back out a way that I did not come, go a different direction. The old prophet lied to him and said, I'm a prophet just like you. I hear from God just like you do. And the angel of God came and told me to tell you to come back with me. So he's like, okay, well, this man is a true man of God. He's a prophet. He hears from God too. Okay, I'm going to go back. He goes back and it changed his life. Not honoring your obedience to God can change your life, because he did not adhere to what God told him and he believed what God, quote unquote, told somebody else. So if you ever had somebody come up and say, the Lord told me to tell you, I like to tell people, thank you very much, but God also talks to me. So if God is going to tell a prophet to tell you something, it's going to confirm something that he has already told you, or it's not going to be against what he has said. Why? Because God speaks to us in love, authority, and he ain't going against his word. So God had already told him something. He now went back on what God told him. He went back to this man's house. He ate and drank. And as he was sitting there, the older prophet heard the word of the Lord now after he done lied. And he said, tell the prophet that I sent that he is going to die because he did not do what I told him to do. Now, what I want us to get from this is that disobedience may cause you death. That's serious. I'm going to say it a couple of more times because I feel like somebody really needs to hear it. Disobedience will cause you to die. Disobedience will cause you to give up the ghost. Disobedience will cause you to lay your life down and live no more. Not doing what God has told you to do will cause you physical, actual, literal death. I'm saying this in the harshest ways possible because I feel like somebody needs to hear it in the harshest ways possible. Not doing what God has called you to do when you know you have heard him will cause you to die. Listening to what somebody else said when you know what God said is going to cause you to lose your life. This man of God who had just went and said what the Lord had said do, healed the man and went and kept following God. At what somebody told him, he lost his life. The man went away after he had done what God told him not to do, and a lion ate him. And what ended up happening was the lion stood by him and his donkey and did not touch the man's body after he killed him and did not touch the donkey. So the old prophet, feeling bad about what he had done, mind you, the person who lied, the person who was actually wrong in this situation, had nothing happened to him. God didn't say, I'm gonna curse you because you lied. I'm gonna curse him. I'm gonna kill him because he did something that I told him not to do. So the person who really started this whole issue and drama had nothing come against him. And then the man told his son, bury him in my tomb. The man couldn't even be buried in his family's tomb because back in that day, that was your honor, was to be buried with your family, with your fathers, with your forefathers. He couldn't even have that happen. So he was buried in a stranger's tomb who lied to him. And now he had to spend his bones days with this man who lied to him. So when the old prophet died, he told his sons to bury me with this man. You will die, possibly, very surely, as the word says in here, if you do not follow obedience to God. You guys know I am very clear on obedience. Obedience, this is a clear indication that not being obedient to what God has you to do is a direct sin. It don't matter how many good deeds you do. It doesn't matter how many times you listen to God before. Not listening to God, even if it's one time, being disobedient one time, even though you've done everything right, may cause you to lose your life. I don't want to take, what's that commercial? I don't want to take that ride. I can't take that chance. I can't. This hit me so hard, and I was like, it don't have to make sense no more at all. It didn't have to, but it really don't now, because at one time he literally lost his life immediately after he left and did something that God told him not to do. So let that be your warning that being disobedient to God may cause you to die. Okay? I'm gonna let that sit there. So then we go on, this was in chapter 13. So we went through chapter 12, chapter 13. We get to chapter 14 now. Oh, and God basically was telling Jeroboam that he had sinned more than all the others that were before him. And that's why I wanted to go and find out why was Ahab like, how was Ahab worse than him? Somebody put in the chat, thank God for covering us, me in my young and dumb ways when I knew better. Listen, in the name of Jesus. And again, this goes to show us, again, he did so many things that were right. But because he clearly heard God and disobeyed him, God was like, I'm not playing with you. Get up out of here. Bye. Immediately. So then we go on in chapter 16. This is where we're introduced to Ahab and Jezebel. So we're going to talk about Jezebel next week because I ain't even got time to get on her because of all this other stuff that was happening. So we're introduced to them. Ahab takes Jezebel as his wife. We're going to talk about more about that next week. In chapter 17, Elijah comes into the story. And Elijah tells Ahab that he will not have rain except by his word. He basically tells him, because you've done so wrong, God is going to put a drought on this land and you will not have any rain, not even dew, not mist is going to come because you're doing so bad. You've done so wrong in the sight of God. So after God has given Elijah this command, he had him go into hiding. And I was like, well, God, why did you have him go into hiding? And I was like, well, and again, this wasn't confirmed, but this is what I was thinking, like maybe God had him go into hiding because he didn't want people to ask him, well, when is the rain going to come? When are you going to say it's going to rain? When do you think it's going to start raining? Has God told you it's going to? God didn't want nobody to bother him about that. He said, it's like one of them things, I said what I said. Until God, I say so, it's not going to rain. And that's what thus says the Lord. So God had him go into hidings and he gave him a brook of water and he said that the ravens will come and feed you. So the ravens came to feed him twice a day, in the morning and in the night. What I want us to get from this is that God made provision for him. God, again, he obeyed what God told him to do, and it didn't matter what he felt like. He's like, God, go into hiding. Well, where am I going to eat? Where am I going to drink? God said, don't worry about that. God can and will use anything. He used birds, ravens, to be waiters and servers to him every single day while he was in hiding. And he provided a brook of water where there was no water in the land, because the land had become a desolate, dry place. But God said, because you have obeyed me, I'm going to provide for you. And I'm going to continue to provide for you because you did what I say do. So sometimes in our lives, we may not be seeing provision because we're not following in the obedience of what God has told us to follow. We're not operating in the spirit of, God, I trust you no matter what's going on in my life, no matter what it looks like, no matter where I may be. I'm going to trust what you told me to do. And I'm going to trust that you are the God of gods and you're going to provide for me, because you said in his word, he says that the righteous are never forsaken, and you don't see their seeds begging for bread. So he didn't have to worry about any of that because God provided for him, right? So I said he can use anything to bless him. So when the brook finally dried up, God instructed him to go to a widow. And at this time, the land, again, is a dry and desolate place. And I want to say it had been 3 years at that time. This is what I didn't write down, but I believe it had been 3 years. So we go into chapter 17, and he sees the widow, and he asks the widow for a cup of water. And the widow says, okay, he says, and go, and I want you to make me a cake. And the widow comes and tells him that all I have is this small barrel of meal and a small jar of oil. Basically, I'm going to make this cake for my son and I. She was looking for 2 sticks so that she could start a fire to bake this cake for her and her son so that they can die. She basically was making their last meal. She's like, this is all we have left. I know that after we eat this, we're going to die because we have nothing else to eat. I have nothing else in my house. And Elijah tells her, if you do as I have said, your barrel of meal will never go empty and your jar of oil will never run dry as long as there's drought in this land, if you do what I say. And so she, believing in what this prophet and man of God said, she did exactly as she said. She gave him some water. She took the meal. She took the oil. She made a cake for him. She made a cake for she and her son, and they lived. She went from thinking she was about to die, but again, obedience to what it was that God was saying through this man of God. She trusted it. She believed it. She tested it and it worked. So she goes on, and in this time while Elijah is in her house, her son actually stops breathing to where they think her son has died. And she said, have you brought a curse upon my house because my son's dead? So Elijah goes up, he takes his son into the chamber, and he lays on the son and he cries out to God, like, God, you brought me into this woman's house. Why is her son dead? He lays on him, he prays 3 times, and life came back into the boy. She took the boy back down to his mother, and she's like, I know that you are a man of God. I know God, again, resurrects the dead. So even though a situation may look like it's dead, even though somebody's health may be declining, maybe it's not time for them to go. If God says it's so, it's so. he brought this little boy back to life. This is in chapter 17. In chapter 18, we're introduced into Obadiah. And I told y'all I got 4 pages of notes, so I'm trying to go through this as quick and best as possible. So Obadiah feared God, but he also feared Ahab. So Ahab and Obadiah go out their separate ways. Obadiah comes into contact with Elijah and he says, go tell Ahab that you found me. And he tells him, okay, he says, I want to challenge the prophets of Baal. I want to challenge because I want to know how long you guys really plan on serving and worshiping him. And when I was reading this part, I was like, well, what are the Baals of our life? Like, what are we serving and honoring sometimes more than we're serving or honoring God? Is it social media? Is it money? Is it a relationship? Is it our children? Is it church? Is it people? Are we serving these things sometimes more than we're serving and worshiping God? Is that what we have made our iconic Baal of this time? Is that something that we put before God? Because remember, an idol is anything that you give more time or worship to than God. What is that for us? Or is it? Because some people it might not be. But I want you to really think about, have you made something more important than your time with God? Have you created your own Baal in your life? And it may not be something that you're bowing down to. It may not be a golden calf that's in your house, but is it something that you're giving more time to God? And so he says, how much longer will you guys worship Baal? So he basically goes and he challenges him. And he says, the God that answers by fire will be God. And the people are like, okay, that makes sense. All right, cool. We get with that. We'll agree to that. No problem, right? So he tells them, I want you to go get two bulls. And I want us both to put our bulls on the altar. And again, the God that answers by fire, be it Baal or God, that's the God. Elijah's, he's going to bed at this point. So he tells them, I want you guys to go first. You pick your bull, you set up your altar, and you call on your God. And we'll see, right? So the people, there are 450 prophets of Baal. It's 450 of them and one Elijah. And this is, I want us to understand that sometimes you may have to stand alone, but if you know that God has directed and instructed you and is on your side, it doesn't matter how many people are against you. It doesn't matter what the ops may look like. It doesn't matter what the odds may look like. If it's you and God, that's enough. That's all you need. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit on your side. That's it. So they go, they build their altar. They put they slice up their bull, put the bull on there. They're calling out to their God, Baal, from morning to noon. So by noon, Elijah's like, maybe he's asleep. Maybe he went, he's talking to somebody. He starts mocking them because remember, our God cannot be mocked. We cannot mock our God. So he starts to mock them and their God. So they start cutting themselves. Blood is gushing out everywhere. And he's like, you got to get louder. Maybe he can't hear y'all. Maybe he went to sleep. He's taking a nap. He's far off. He's talking to somebody. He gives them all these things that he may be doing while he can't hear them crying out to him. So they go from now morning to noon. They start cutting themselves. Blood is gushing out. They're making their sacrifices. From noon to the evening sacrifice, still nothing has happened. So Elijah's like, bet, it's my time. Your God didn't answer by fire. He didn't come. So just give me a chance. My turn. I'm gonna just go ahead. Just me. All y'all cool. Just me. So this is when I knew Elijah was a gangster. He says, dig a ditch around my altar. A big ditch. Build a pool around it. Okay. Now what I want y'all to do is he sets up 12 stones. And the 12 stones are in representation of Jacob's sons, the 12 tribes of Israel. We know Jacob was renamed Israel. So he puts the 12 stones around his altar in homage, in honor of the 12 tribes of Israel who have now turned against him. And when I was reading this reminded me that Jacob who was wrong because he stole the birthright from Esau. This is why you got to go back in Bible study. But the 12 tribes of Israel came from Joseph's vision and Joseph's honoring and obedience to God. Again, we see obedience again. Joseph was so obedient to God that he went through the pit, the prison, and to the palace. And I've taught this lesson over and over, and we might do that another time. But because he was obedient to what God had told him, he was put into the pit by his brothers, sold into slavery, goes into Potiphar's house. Potiphar's wife lies on him because he was so obedient to God, he would not sleep with her. He's put into prison. In prison, he's able to interpret visions and dreams because he had them. That's why it's important, if you have visions and dreams, to really write them down and ask God what they mean. Whole nother story and session and lesson. But he goes and he tells the cupbearer and the baker what their dreams mean. They go back to Pharaoh. They tell Pharaoh has a dream that he can't interpret about the calves and the wheat bowing down. 7 years of famine, 70 years of plenty. They say, oh, we remember this guy who was in prison who told us. Again, his obedience. We see obedience. God, the whole time I was doing this study on Jezebel, but before Jezebel, he was showing me obedience. So I don't know who this is for, but if you are being disobedient, I need you to understand right now, this is God saying to you, listen to what I'm saying. Not me, but the Lord. Because I don't know what he told you, but he told you something. So he goes back. This is back to the story of Elijah. He says, okay, put the 12 rocks for the 12 tribes of Israel. Again, when I know he was a gangster, he said, and I want you to put water all on the wood, all on the bull. And in matter of fact, I want you to put water all around this ditch that I had you put around my sacrifice. And he goes and he prays a prayer. And I actually want to read what the actual prayer was. Let me see. Where are we in? First Kings chapter 18. Because it wasn't this long drawn out prayer. And sometimes we think we have to go to God with all of these words, and we have to go to God and we have to say to him all these things. But he said, where is it? He said, the Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and of Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your word. Hear me, O Lord, hear me, so that this people may know that you are the Lord God, and that you have turned their hearts back again. That was it. Mind you, the other 450 prophets been praying morning, noon, and night. This is all he said. And it said, then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt sacrifice and the wood and the stones and the dust and licked up the water that was in the trench. Right after he prayed this very short prayer. Why? Because it don't take all that sometimes to get to God to answer. God answered by fire and did more. And this is what I want us to say, to understand out of this part, is that God didn't tell him to do all of this to show and prove. He just said the God that answered by fire. He went beyond that. He said, I want these people to understand that it's not just the God that answers by fire, but it's the God that answered by fire in a situation that seemed impossible, because this is drenched in water. Fire and water cannot live in the same place. They're opposites. Fire and water, you put water on fire, it's done. But he's like, I want you to understand that even though this looks like an impossible situation, so I don't understand I don't know what may be an impossible situation in your life. I don't know what sacrifice you have, or I don't know what you're offering or what you're giving to God that is drenched in water. But he said, I'm still the God that's going to answer by fire. In this situation that don't look like I can. In this situation that looks impossible. In this situation that is not set up or conducive for fire to even live, or fire to even be able to come. He says, I'm going to have fire and I'm going to make all of this dust. I'm going to lick up the dust and I'm going to lick up the water in the trench. So it's going to be nothing. I'm going to answer by fire. And you know, when you say it twice, it really means something. I'm going to answer by fire. That's what I got. So God came, and when the people saw it, it says they fell on their face and said, the Lord, he is God, the Lord, he is God. And so this is in 1 Kings chapter 18, verses, I started at verse 36 and then went on to verse 39. So after all of that, God answered. And the people agreed and said, he's God. And so right after that, Elijah had the 400. He said, all right, now go ahead and kill all of these false prophets. So he goes on and they kill the false prophets. And let me go back. Let me see, because I got ahead of myself in my notes. Oh, he asked God to show himself, and he did. His obedience saved these people. Again, we see obedience, because he was obedient to understand that I'm going to show God's people who he is, not who I am, but who God is. Remember, God had been speaking through Elijah. He had told him the rain's not going to come back until I say it's going to come, until you say it's going to come back through me, not on your timing, but my timing. So when he asked God to show himself, and he did, he had the prophets of Baal killed, but not Ahab. Mind you, Ahab was the one. Jeroboam went ahead and had the people turn against God, but Ahab had also turned against God and had started worshiping Baal because of Jezebel, because of his covenant with his wife. So again, who you get into covenant with can change or be detrimental to you. So he didn't have Ahab killed, but he had the prophets killed. And he said, okay, you know what? It'll be rainfall. And he's like, okay, now it's going to be rainfall. So he goes out to, hold on, wait, did he go to, I'm trying to see if he had went to go fast at this point. Did I skip that part? Okay. Sorry, y'all. This was good. Nope, he did that. He did that. It was a time where he went, and I'm trying to see what chapter it was in. Oh, okay. We haven't gotten there yet. Sorry. Okay, so he tells him rainfall is going to come from the sky. And at this time, there were no clouds in the sky. Nothing looks like, y'all know when you could be like, you know, it might rain. So he says rainfall is going to come from the sky. So he goes up to the Mount Carmel, and he sent his servant to see if there was a sign of rain. So he goes, and the servant comes back, and he's like, nope, I don't see any clouds, nothing that looks like it's going to be rain. So he says, go back 7 times. So he sends them back. Again, obedience. The servant doesn't ask why. The servant is like, I keep going and looking and saying the same thing. Obedience. He keeps going back. The 7th time he comes back, he's like, okay, I went, and there's a cloud that's the size of a man's fist. If you think that that's significant, go out right now and look at the sky and look at how big the sky is and see how small your hand is compared to that sky. He said, there's a cloud the size of a man's fist. Elijah said, go and tell Ahab that rain is coming. It's going to be a downpour. So what I want you to realize, it doesn't matter how small the cloud may be. If God says it's going to be a downpour, if God says it's going to be a rain, he can use it. God don't need much to do a lot. So he says, okay, he goes to tell Ahab that rain is coming, and he tells Ahab to go. Tell Ahab to go because the downpour is coming. The great rain came, the downpour comes, and Elijah outruns Ahab, who had a head start in front of him. Ahab had way more time, but because God was on Elijah's side, he was able to outrun Ahab. And so it says God's hand was upon him. And so what I want us to really declare in this season of obedience, because we're going to walk in obedience with God, is God, let your hand be upon me, because I'm going to be able to outrun my enemy. I'm going to be able to outrun the people who had a head start. I'm going to be able to outrun all that I thought the time that I thought I lost, the season that I thought I lost, the legs that I'm going to be able to go beyond that not because I'm good and great in all of this, but because your hand is upon me. God, keep your hands upon me. That's another prayer. The prayer of Jabez says, God, keep your hand upon me. So when God's hand is on you, you can do things that people would never understand or imagine. And it's not by your will or not by your might, but it's by the hand of God. So part of our prayer should be, God, let your hand be upon me. So then we go on to chapter 19, and Ahab goes on and tells Jezebel, again, I told you I had like 2 points about Jezebel. He goes on and he tells Jezebel about what Elijah does, and then she threatens him. She says that basically, because you have done this, I'm going to kill you. And Elijah, the man who hears from God, the man who just mocked 450 prophets and turned all of the people back to God, feared this one woman. And I was like, why is he fearing her? So we're going to talk about that next week, because we're going to talk about Jezebel more next week. But I was like, one woman had that much power to scare this man? That 450 men couldn't scare him, but one woman scared him to go into hiding? Make it make sense. But it happens. So even though he just saw God show himself, even though God just came through for him, even though God was upon him and he outran Ahab, even though he trusted God with this fist-sized cloud in the sky, when she said, I'm going to kill you, he believed her and ran. So he became depressed. This one woman put this man into depression. Not him being in hiding before with ravens coming to feed him, but because she was like, you know what, I want you dead. He became depressed and he said, God, take my life. His exact words is, it is enough. Now, oh Lord, take my life, for I am not better than my fathers. He's like, I'm done. I can't do this no more. This one woman wants me dead. God, I can't, I'm done. And the angel of the Lord came to him twice and said, eat and drink, because he was under a tree asking God to take his life. He became suicidal. God, he was like, take me to the king, Tamala Man style. Take me to the king. I don't have much to bring. My heart is torn in pieces. Here's my offering. Lay me at the throne. Leave me all alone to gaze upon your glory and sing to you the song, take me to the king. He was the original Tamala Man. So he was saying, take me to the king, right? So God sent the angel of the Lord to him to say something to him twice. Basically was like, get up and eat and drink because your work is not done. So the second time he's like, okay, I'm gonna have obedience, because we know Elijah is an obedient man. The second time he goes 40 days and 40 nights without eating anything. That was his last meal. So this basically was a time of fasting. We'll talk more about fasting later on, but this was a true time of fasting. It says that was the last thing he had for 40 days and 40 nights. He goes on and he goes into Horeb, the mountain of God, Hereb. I might be saying that wrong. And after this, he hears from God. And so this is where this is one of my favorite scriptures in the Bible. And he says, God tells him to go and stand on the mountain. He said, because I'm going to talk to you there. And so the wind split the mountains. The earthquake came. God was not in the earthquake. It says the fire came. God was not in the fire. But it says, after all of this, there was a still small voice. And that is how God spoke to him. And so sometimes we have to realize, again, this is him coming out of the time of fasting. So hell literally breaks loose. Wind is splitting up mountains, earthquakes are coming, fire is coming, all of this is coming, and God is not speaking in the midst of all of this after he just came out of this time of prayer and fasting. And it says, after all of that, when he went through, after he sees all of this happening. So sometimes you may be in a time of prayer and fasting and you see earthquakes, you see wind tearing stuff apart, you see fire coming, literally burning stuff up, and God is like, yeah, I know you just came out of prayer and fasting, but let all this happen because I'm still going to speak to you in a still small voice. I don't need all of that noise. I don't need all of that ruckus. Now that that's done, okay, I'm gonna come and I'm gonna tell you what I gotta say. So sometimes this may be an instance, or this is an example of an instance where things get worse before they get better. So all of the worst had to happen before he can truly hear the voice of God. Because remember, Elijah hears God. So he knew, okay, all of this is going on. I'm not hearing God. So God said, let all of this happen and I'm going to speak to you. And then he God, before he went there, God had told him, what are you doing here, Elijah? And he said, okay, go stand up on a mountain. So then God comes back to him after all of this, and he says, what are you doing here, Elijah? And he gave God the same response. So sometimes you may give God a response and he sends fire, wind, rain, earthquake. And then he may ask you the same thing again. And it's like, okay, well, maybe I didn't know. He stood firm on what he said. So maybe you don't need to change your prayer. You just need to wait until the hail comes and then say it again. But you have to discern the voice of God to know when you're going to say it again. So he repeats the same thing to God again, and he tells him to go on the road through the wilderness of Damascus, just like Paul. This was, I don't know, I've read this so many times, and this is the first time that stood out to me, is he said, go to the road through the wilderness of Damascus. And I'm going to cut it off there because I think we've been going for a minute. But just think, the road to Damascus was his point for Elijah, and it also happens to be a turning point for Paul. So where is God leading you? What is your road to Damascus that you need to be on for God to be able to speak to you clearly, for you to be able to hear him? So I'm going to cut it off there. We're going to go into our Holy Ground meeting. We're going to pick this back up because we're now in, I think, chapter 19. We may be in 20. But we go on chapter 21 is where we learn about Jezebel again. So we're going to pick up next week with that. So stay tuned.